Hi, everyone. My name is Leo Chiang. I'm a documentary filmmaker based in the US and in Taiwan. And today I have the great pleasure of chatting with my friends, Dan Gellar and Dayna Goldfine, about their fabulous film, Hallelujah, Leonard Cohen, A Journey, a Song. And it's been a long time since I've seen you guys. I'm trying to remember
Wow.
when the last time was it when you guys gave us a ride from the airport home, maybe a few years ago?
You know what? It was. Oh my gosh. And we were coming in from overseas. Wow.
I
Like
know there was just such
Taiwan.
a random
Uh,
chance. So
it was
um
like whole documentaries
It
ago.
was.
I know, and then it's definitely in the before times, right? So
Yeah.
um
Yes.
yeah, speaking of the whole documentary ago, congratulations you guys on this beautiful, moving new film, the Leonard Cohen documentary, and how well it's been doing, since it premiered. Was it 2020 or 2021?
So it premiered at Venice in 2021. So like
And Telluride.
and Telluride. Yes. Yes.
At the same time, right? Right. They
At-
were like
yeah.
they overlap. Okay.
Yeah. So September 2021. So it's been about a year and 3 months.
And it went into theaters in the US in the summer, just this past summer. It's still in theaters in France and Germany. It just opened up in Benelux. So it's still out there.
That's which is fabulous. Kind of like Leonard Cohen himself. Just keeps going and going, like the Energizer Bunny.
Oh, I love that. And I love that metaphor. Thank you.
But I was actually really curious, how did you guys come about this project? Was it something that you generated, or did it come from somebody else? And I imagine, to be able to gain the access to the all the material, there's probably some many stars aligned for it to all happen.
Well, you know how sometimes, I'm assuming you probably had this experience too as a documentary filmmaker, but a story or a film starts sometimes years before you actually realize consciously that it's starting. So in lots of ways, I think this project started in, gosh, probably around 2009 when we were taken to see a Leonard Cohen concert. And it was the first year that he was back on tour. As he says in the film, I haven't been on stage for 14 years. I was a 60-year-old guy who was just a kid with a crazy dream. And we saw him doing those tours, and were introduced to him in many ways by these friends that took us. And during that concert, when he came on stage to perform Hallelujah and he got to his knees, and you see it in our film, you see what he was giving to the audience when he was singing that song. And I think that image stuck in our heads. So years and years later, like 2014, we were having a conversation with a really dear friend of ours, David Thompson, who's a film critic. And he said, have you ever considered doing a documentary about a single song? And what came flooding back was this image of Leonard getting on stage in 2009. So in some ways, the film started in 2014 with this kind of dare on the part of David Thompson saying, would you consider making a documentary about a song? And in other ways, I think it started when friends serendipitously took us to see Leonard in 2009.
But when we approached Leonard, and the first thing we did was we did some research, found that Alan Light had written this book about Hallelujah, and Jeff Buckley and Leonard Cohen. It's a wonderful book. And we got the rights to the book and brought Alan into the project. And Alan suggested that we approach Leonard through his manager, Robert Corey, to ask for a tacit blessing, which was necessary for Sony Music Publishing, which owned the rights to the song, to in order to start negotiating some sort of purchase on our part of the rights to the song, because Leonard could have blocked it and said, no, not interested. But he was curious. And when you say sometimes there are layers of things that just have to line up to make it go right, even though in the beginning phases of this movie, the first couple of years we were making it, we knew not to ask for anything from Leonard, and after Leonard had passed away, not to really ask anything from Robert Corey, who became the trustee of the estate. But we began to earn each other's respect in the course of making the movie. And Robert has this phrase, that the universe sometimes has a way of organizing things. And so that's when you mention it, I think, yeah, that was a Robert phrase that came around a lot of times as pieces began to fall into play for us, connections that were made, or people who, like Ratso, came up with those audio tapes that were in his closet. And so that's part of the fun for me of making a documentary, certainly of this kind, that all these connections and interplays begin to build on each other.
I mean, I think to me, and I think I said that to you in the email. To me, that what the most fascinating aspect of this film is that you came at it from a song instead of it being a biopic about a musician, or sort of a typical music documentary that's driven by a specific concert event or whatnot. Can you guys kind of talk about the tension, sort of trying to make these two parallel films and weaving it together and having it all work?
I think that, and again, I bet this, so much of making a documentary happens in the editing room. And so we knew from the beginning that it was going to be about Leonard Cohen as seen through the prism of this song. And it freed us up in lots of ways, because it eliminated the need to do a typical biopic, which is like the cradle to grave. This is where the artist is born, and then this is what he did now. Instead, like, everything had to relate to letting an audience understand why it was that Leonard Cohen was the only person in the universe that could have written Hallelujah, and what it was about him and about his spiritual journey and his life journey that led him to be able to write this song that ultimately was universal, but that originated from his very specific Leonard Cohen experience.
And also the song has a couple of strong elements to it that made for a good portal into Leonard, the author, the writer, the songwriter, the performer. The first is that it's so filled with the dualities that were so important in Leonard's life: holiness and brokenness, and the sublime and the carnal, and the tensions of all of that. So it's almost like the reflection of all his life. So that, and then also the song has its own crazy trajectory of difficulty in writing it, and the rejection, and then how it came back to become this standard in a way. So if you had to pick a song, even from the entire Cohen catalog or anybody's song, it's a unique song in that respect, and it made it easy. But when you mention the tension, just in terms of making it, we're upstairs in our edit suite, and I'm looking over to the left here, and there's the 4 magnetic boards with index cards on them that are kind of color coded about, now we're in Leonard land, now we're in Hallelujah land, and those cards moved around a lot. There was a lot of trial and error to find those balances and those points where you'd want to inflect and go over to more of Leonard's life and then deflect back over to the song. And that's why it took a couple of years to edit this.
And when we started cutting, I did the first pass, and what I said to Dan is, because I don't know exactly how this is going to start. I mean, I know I can envision where it will start after the credits, the main credit cycle or credit comes up, but I can't envision what's going to lead into it. So let's just leave that behind and start with this moment when Leonard goes and tells the world that he's not just a poet and a novelist, but he's actually a songwriter. And luckily we had that incredible moment when he does that for Adrienne Clarkson on television. And so we kind of knew in the beginning that that's probably where the film would start. And we knew that we were going to have Jeff Buckley. And we thought we'd probably have Shrek. But then we didn't know when we first started out that Brandi Carlile was going to have that unbelievable story about how the song helped her reconcile her faith and her sexuality. We didn't know that in the midst of editing, Eric Church, who we had never heard of really, because we don't normally listen to country western crossover music, but that Eric Church was going to kind of rock Nashville by deciding to sing Hallelujah spontaneously. So those are the kinds of things that came in as we were trying to figure out, how do we balance out Leonard's story and the story of the song, and then the story of how the song connects with people who decide to sing it.
Well, I actually wanted to ask you more about the whole process of editing. I imagine that the archival material that you obtained was sort of pivotal in you guys deciding how to approach the project and what direction it takes. So I was actually curious, like, did you get sort of the treasure trove of material from Ratso, from Sony, from the estate first, or did you decide to go and interview all these folks and then did a paper cut that way? Like, how did you kind of jump into
Oh
it?
my gosh, great question.
And we decided to start interviewing and researching at the same time and begin to dive into the archives right around the same time. We shot that first interview with Rats, and we shot things with John Lissauer. So it was happening double tracked. And some things came in early. We were at the Sony Legacy Records offices, and they were very helpful in opening up their archives. And that's where we found, for example, that interview material with Leonard and Ratso in the cafe that was done actually for an album subsequent to various positions. But
That was
great
amazing.
material.
Yeah.
It's amazing. And it was really a press kit, electronic press kit piece that was shot for another album. But Ratso was asking him about Hallelujah. And in the EPK, I don't think they used any of that. The EPK used a tiny fraction of that whole interview, but we had all of that source material, the raw material. So things like that were there fairly early on, but some material didn't come in until much later on, after Leonard had passed away and Robert Corey began to assemble an archive. Eventually, his hope is to place that archive at a significant institution or two. But that's where material came in, like those Polaroid photos, the selfies that Leonard took, including the one that wound up on the cover of various positions, or the concert recordings from the world tour. So it was sort of a moving target in a way. As more material came in, it just added to the richness of what was there. But the basic structure was in place. It's just that we were able to really cook the sauce more that way.
But so much of it, I think, is so much of being a filmmaker, a documentary filmmaker, is sort of being like it's almost like being a bloodhound on the scent of something. And so, you follow your intuition, right? And so, like, we didn't know about Ratso, and we certainly didn't think he was going to be this hugely instrumental and important kind of central figure, almost like a Virgil type figure, leading us on the way through the story. Because he didn't even show up in Alan Light's book, which was the inspiration for the whole film. We were reading this biography of Leonard, and Ratso showed up just briefly, and there was just something about his appearance in this other biography where, I don't know, it just piqued our interest. And so when we hooked up with Hal Wilner and Rachel Fox, Hal was this incredible man who we dedicate the film to. He was the music producer, and then Rachel's worked with him and was his supervisor. Anyway, we said to Rachel, have you ever heard of this guy named Ratso Sloman? Because I just read his name in Sylvie Simmons' biography. And she was like, have we heard of him? He's one of our best friends. Next time you come to New York, let's have dinner. And so we just started having dinner with Ratso every time we came to New York. And that happened for a while before we could film, because it took us so long to clear the rights. And then, because we knew him, we're sitting there interviewing him. And at the end of the interview, he laid out this incredible, he just dropped that he had all these cassette tapes going back to 1974. And he then told us about this interview that he'd done with Leonard that he didn't think had ever been seen or used for anything other than an EPK. So all of a sudden, this person that we thought we were just going to interview in a typical kind of talking head way morphed into this central character. And I think that happens as you start down the path of these films, if you just kind of listen and keep sleuthing and keep following your instinct.
I don't know if this is a sensitive question or not. I assume that you guys did started the film when Leonard Cohen was still alive, and I imagine that you've contemplated or you thought about interviewing him, or maybe you made requests. What was that journey like?
Well, Alan Light also had advised us not to ask for an interview, that Leonard was not going to give anybody any interviews. And in fact, even when he put out his final album, You Want It Darker, he had a listening party where he invited journalists to sit and listen to the record with him and then have a conversation. But there would be no more interviews. And he was done with it. I mean, partly he was not feeling as well, but beyond that, he was just done with interviews. So we knew going in there would be no interview, and we didn't really harbor the idea of getting one. And although I always had hoped that maybe we'd have a chance to sit down with Leonard and show him the movie, that would have been lovely. But what that obstacle did was it just forced us to take a look at the breadth of interviews that had been conducted with Leonard, starting with that CBC documentary in the early 1960s, Ladies and Gentlemen, Mr. Leonard Cohen. He wasn't even a songwriter then. He was a well-regarded poet. So that framed the movie in a way, since he had been documented from the moment he had become a songwriter all the way to the end, that we could live his life alongside with him and use the interviews for the most part in chronological order, so that he could be talking about his life and reflecting on his life in the moment rather than a big grand backwards look. And I think that, to me, I think it helps an audience feel like they're going through it with him rather than in some ways having it at one step removed.
Or listening to, I mean, if we would have known in the beginning that we probably could have interviewed him, we might have reconceptualized the film so that it was, this older man looking back at his life. And because we knew, based on everything we'd heard, and especially what Alan Light told us, that if there was any way we were going to make progress and get to do this project, we needed to make it really clear that we didn't need this interview. It just informed the way that we approached it. Mm-hmm. And I think I'd like to think that it actually made the film in some ways wider. And I think sometimes when you ask someone to look back on their life, well, first of all, it gets edited, right, because of their memories and what they bring into it from the position of being, say, an 82-year-old guy. So I'm hoping that because we had that obstacle of not being able to sit with Leonard and put him in front of a camera, that it hopefully it allowed us to construct the film in a way where the viewer gets to go along on that chronological journey that Leonard went on without mediating it through this older guy looking back.
I actually, in many ways, really love that he's not in the film, because to me, the mystery of him is one of the both the charm of him as a performer, as somebody that people obviously feel this sort of spiritual connection to, and also to me, the film became, what does Leonard Cohen mean to me, for all these different people? And that to me is actually a really wonderful way of, seeing a person and seeing a life. And particularly everything that you guys had with Ratso, from the interview, which is like, he's like the opposite of Leonard Cohen, this like rough guy who cusses all the time. And then the audio interviews, and then that EPK stuff, which, feels like so interesting, yeah. And anyway, I actually, to me, I really do believe that oftentimes these obstacles becomes a strength in the work that we do. So yeah.
Thank you.
The other theme, and I think Dan, you already kind of touched a little bit about that quote that Ratso, actually it wasn't his quote, it was his quote of the review of how like Leonard Cohen is pulled between holiness and horniness, right? I actually want you guys to talk about this sort of duality, of desire and faith, of this sort of song and the person, and how this divide inform how you guys, put the film together. Specifically, like the faith is so prominent, in the film.
I think one reason that film's played all over the world, and one reason it seems to play regardless of religion or country for the most part, is this is the human condition. And whether you're religious or not, or what religion, it's there. It's part of us. This notion of our baser impulses and our higher higher angels, so to speak. And that, I think that he just expresses that in such an honest way, and a way as a poet with such beauty of language and such beautiful imagery, and also in the way of a poet with a little bit of concealment, that things are alluded to often in Hallelujah and in his other songs. Images are created, but they're a little bit hard to put a hand on, which is, to my mind, the mark of a really brilliant poet. And then, of course, the music itself is just gorgeous. But because he's expressing something that is so key to our biology and psychology, it just, you want to have sex, but then there's this other part saying, oh, maybe that's, maybe it's dirty to do that if you're at all religious.
Or you want to question God or the spirit or whatever it is. I think possibly even an atheist might have something that they question, right? And that this idea that there's something in the universe that you want to question. And I think that Leonard allows us to feel good about asking those questions, because he spent his whole life asking them. And as he says at a certain point in the film, or Sharon Robinson, actually, who was his longtime partner, in creative partner, not romantic partner, but she talks about how in many ways he conflated women and spirituality and sexuality and that search for whatever the guiding force is. And it's that conflation, I think, that led to his ability to write a song like Hallelujah, which is so deep and so inchoate and as you would say, mysterious, and you can't really define exactly what it's about.
Well, he says, there's that beautiful radio interview where he talks about the longing of a connection to the creator or a creator, and knowing that there's an almost an impossibility to have that confirmed. And so you find it in longing for each other, in longing for the human connection, and longing for love, and in his case, love of women especially. And so you see, that's very interesting, because you can't quite put a finger on it. You know what he's trying to express, and that's typical, I think, of that mindset that comes through in so much of his interview material as well as in the song.
Well, and I think that's why, for instance, Brandi Carlile, in making the song Hallelujah her own, and putting it out into the world through her voice and her perspective, I mean, I think that's why it was such an important way of her reconciling, as she was coming of age, reconciling her sexuality and her faith. I mean, her faith wasn't Jewish like Leonard's was, but she was deeply enmeshed in Christianity. And when she was coming of age and starting to identify as a lesbian, it was just like, oh my God, here's this song that lets me deal with this, that brings up all these issues of faith and sexuality that I'm needing to reconcile right at this moment.
I mean, maybe it is sort of this blurriness between desire and spirituality in his song that sort of enable us to feel so profoundly connected to it, but without being able to articulate why, because it's just here. Like, you can't really describe it in its the most accurate way. Yeah.
And he's not giving you the answer either. He's putting out the dualities and also the impossibility of resolving some of this. And so he's not giving answers. But he's giving you room to acknowledge those dualities. And then his own search, that his own hunting for meaning across his life, which then paradoxically winds up, as far as a force that was disturbing him, dissolving and allowing him just to take joy in being, late in his life. And you can see that in the performance footage from those last tours. He really looks like someone who has found a path to some sort of contentment, at least as a performer, you see it.
Well, he says, the search itself dissolved. I spent my whole life searching, thinking I was going to find something and it was going to make me happy. Instead, that search and the need for that search itself dissolved. And all of a sudden, he reached this state of grace. But, I was just thinking as Dan was talking, and we've been going back and forth, we never got to meet Leonard. In a way, he gave us some instruction, which I feel good about your response to the film, because it makes me think we listened to it. So when we interviewed Dominique Isserman, she was in Los Angeles and staying with Leonard. And we did not film her at Leonard's house, but she left Leonard to come and sit for this interview. And she told us that the last thing he said to her before she went to be interviewed by us was, please don't let those filmmakers be too literal. Please let the mystery of the song and what it means and my music and my art stay a mystery. Don't let them say, for instance, that it was your chair that I was tied to. And
it wasn't, to be clear, she didn't tie him to her chair.
Right. But I mean,
and we never would have asked that kind of question anyway.
She didn't know that and he didn't know
right.
that, right? But I love, so that was kind of the only direction we ever got from Leonard. It was channeled to us through Dominique.
Do you know he's ever seen the film, or he had ever seen the film?
No, because we approached him in 2014, just before he turned 80. He said yes pretty quickly, but then we had to spend time clearing the rights to the song because, of course, Leonard no longer owned his publishing rights. By the time we did that, it was the summer of 2016. So we started interviewing people, and Leonard passed away in November of 2016. So we interviewed, I'm really, really happy and relieved that we got to interview Dominique before he passed away, because some of the interviews we did were not certain that they would have wanted to sit for an interview. Everyone was grieving so much after Leonard died. People like Dominique, Ratso, Hal Wilner. I just think that the perspective and openness, emotional openness that we got in a lot of the interviews with Leonard's close friends and associates might not have been there had we not gotten in there before he passed away.
Well, I can imagine. I don't know the man, but I can imagine that he would very much appreciate the version of his life and of this beautiful song that he sort of shared with the world.
Thanks, Leo.
Well, thank you guys. I can't believe half an hour has already passed. So,
oh my God.
No way, really?
Yes.
Clearly,
it's great
clearly you need. Oh,
I know we need to sort of have a series of podcasts or something that we can.
I know.
Well, because I've still got another half a page of question I didn't even get to.
When's your next trip back from Taiwan to San Francisco?
Hopefully soon. Hopefully
okay.
in February or March.
So
good. You get to see you guys.
Let's make a date of it.
Yes.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Lovely chatting with you guys, and congratulations again on this really beautiful, profound, moving film.
Thanks so much,
Thanks, Leo.